What's up, y'all? Welcome back to our Fish the Moment live stream. We are back after a 1 week break. I was feeling a little bit under the weather and just didn't want to push it. I felt okay. I wasn't feeling that bad, but didn't want to say anything crazy on the stream while I'm kind of a little bit tired and just a little bit of a head cold. But anyways, I'm glad to be back this week. And it's kind of just in time, Randy, because we're going to be talking about cold front bass fishing. And I know today here over in Missouri, Arkansas area, we just had our first major cold front last night. Woke up this morning and it was in the 50s. It was pretty cold. And this is the time of year when you're going to get a lot of cold fronts, a lot of cooler weather coming in. And we're going to explain today in the stream how you can handle those conditions and put fish in the boat. How's it going tonight, Randy?
Doing good, Johnny. It's the time of year that I dread because, man, every day the daylight hours are getting shorter. It's getting colder. That means I can't wear my shorts and my t-shirts much longer. And I do not like the fact that it's getting colder. But one thing that is good about it is it does cause the bass to make a transition into some different moods and different personalities. And I like to fish in the fall. I love fishing in the fall. I just don't like getting out in those cold fall mornings. But it's going to be an interesting topic tonight because I think that there are so many variables surrounding cold front fishing, like post cold front fishing, that I think a lot of times it gets oversimplified. And it's a pretty complex uh, system that takes place based upon so many things around, the lakes that you fish, what type of lakes, water clarities, everything. So it's going to be a lot. This is going to be an info packed evening.
For sure. There's a lot of great info. The number one thing everyone who's watching us live right now, Randy, definitely has is because it gets cold, do you still fish barefoot? Because I know with you, you got to fish barefoot to catch fish. So how do you handle fishing in that cold weather, in those cold fronts? Do you still go barefoot? What do you do?
Most of the time, once it gets too cold for barefoot, I wear those Teva sandals, and you can put, if you put wool socks on Teva sandals, then it still gives you that freedom of movement that I like from being barefoot, but it gives you an added little bit of warmth too. So I slowly transition into the socks and Teva sandals. But no, I prefer going barefoot if I possibly can.
There
I
we
can.
go.
That's a good thing about it. Like in the summertime, you can only do it like till 11 o'clock in the morning, and then the carpet gets so hot you got to put shoes on. So
Gotcha. Okay, Teva sandals. That's the trick. I'm going to try that next time I go shallow flipping. It doesn't seem to bother me when I'm fishing offshore, but I know when you're fishing up shallow, that barefoot connection is the way
well,
to go.
actually, Rick Clunn got me wearing Teva sandals back in the early '90s, and that was when he was wearing. He would go practicing in a speedo bikini swimsuit and Teva sandals. I could never, get comfortable with the speedo bikini swimsuit, but I did take him up on the Tevas.
Yeah, I know with you, Randy, it's either fully closed or fully naked on the boat. Those are the only
That's
two
right.
options for you. We were talking about Randy, the naked photo shoot for a Bass for an article one time, not for Bassmaster, but for an article. We'll save that story. You can watch Randy's YouTube channel for that joke. But anyways, enough fooling around. Let's jump right into the topic here. Before we do that, though, a couple of call outs. First, want to thank both of our title sponsors for the Fish the Moment live stream and podcast, Bridgeford Foods and the Bass Tank out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And basically, we're going to be talking more about them throughout the stream, but one thing I do want to do is announce the winner from our Bridgeford Beef Jerky giveaway from last week. And actually, give me a second here, Randy. I have it pulled up here on my phone. I want to announce the winner. We pick a winner every single week, guys, on the Fish the Moment live stream to win a case of Bridgeford beef jerky. And we're going to be announcing the question or the way that you can enter into our drawing in the halfway point of this live stream. You get 12 cases of Bridgeford beef jerky. But the person who won this last week, let me just find this, is Drawing Weeb. 1 week ago, his question was, how do cold fronts and heat spikes affect the fall migration? And we asked last week what your number one question was about fall bass fishing, and so that was a great question. How do the cold fronts and the heat spikes affect the migration, affect fall fishing? And I kind of took that to a broader sense of how do cold fronts affect bass in general. We're going to focus it more on the fall, just keep it seasonally relevant, but we'll also talk a little bit more about just cold front bass fishing in general. So it was Drawing Weeb or Web. congratulations on winning the Bridgeford beef jerky, and just send us an email over at info@fishmoment.com and you will get that case sent straight to your house. Huge shout out to Bridgeford. And also, gotta thank the Bass Tank, not only for sponsoring the podcast, being one of the best in the industry at installing fish finders. I also got back, Randy, you're going to love this, or you might hate this. I was over there last week with these guys, and they are absolute madmen. I basically brought them a pile of fish finders. I got a bunch of fish finders sent to me by Lawrence and Humminbird. Huge shout out to those guys for testing. And what I'm trying to do is test different models of fish finders at different price points against each other. So they rigged up my boat so that I could interchange all these different fish finders. I got $500 fish finders, $1,000 fish finders, $3,000 fish finders. And I'm going to be doing comparison videos for you guys about what the difference is between, let's say, a $700 Lowrance hook unit and a $3,000 Lowrance HDS unit, or a Humminbird Helix unit versus a Humminbird Solix unit. All these comparisons are coming up, and the Bass Tank were able to wire all that stuff into my 18-foot bass boat. They put dedicated power to every single graph. It was a nightmare, but they are the best in the industry, in my opinion, at putting all that stuff together. So they did an awesome job, and super happy with all of that. So be on the lookout for some of those videos, and also go follow the Bass Tank on social media. We have a bunch of videos with my whole setup and installation over there that's going to be coming soon. So I didn't add any more fish finders, Randy. I'm only still running the 3 at a time, which is still a lot. Mm-hmm. But I have the ability to run like 12 or 14 different fish finders, depending on what I'm testing.
Oh, man.
So,
that's going to be really interesting because, for me, the big key in electronics is simplicity. I mean, I want to have the simplest, as far as face or the surface on there, where I don't have to punch through a bunch of screens and go to different screens to access another screen. And sort of, I wish they would dumb one down for us over 50-year-old dudes that they're just technologically challenged a little bit.
Yeah, it's one of those deals where we're gonna hopefully give you guys a good idea of what you actually need, because you guys know me, I'm not the biggest on like the most expensive equipment. I run Abu Garcia Black Max reels, and I run 9-inch Humminbird Helix fish finder, nothing crazy. So I'm excited to kind of show you guys what some of these kind of lower end units that aren't as expensive can do compared to the higher end units, and just see what shakes out. So it should be interesting.
Yeah, to me, since I'm not affiliated or sponsored by any electronics company, it gives me the freedom to sort of like be super, super honest about it. And just without getting off the side here, the thing that I found about, I've never used Garmin. I use Lowrance and Humminbird. I find Lowrance extremely difficult to navigate through, and I find the Humminbird Helix models extremely easy. That's why I run the Helix. But I just could never get those Lowrances. I struggled so hard navigating through all the options there.
Gotcha. Well, we will put some content out to hopefully help with that as well for guys who are having trouble. I'll be putting that on Fish the Moment's main YouTube channel. So definitely check that out. And maybe we'll get Randy over there too, learning how to use some of these fish finders so we can get him start fishing offshore more often. Good deal. Okay, so let's start talking about cold front bass fishing, Randy. And I'm going to start us off by actually pulling up some graphics here. And before we do that, one thing that I want to do at the highest level is just kind of explain a little bit about what is cold front bass fishing. So I have the weather channel pulled up here. Apologize for all the random ads. These are not affiliated with Fish the Moment. These are just the ads on the weather channel. But basically, if you take a look at some of the coming days here over in Tulsa, Oklahoma, by where we are, you can see that tonight we're going to have 54 degree temperatures for a low. And we actually had about 50 degree temperatures again the night before. So we're having these low temperatures at the nights, and then it warms up really fast to like 80 degrees in the afternoon, and then it drops down to like 50 at night. This is a typical kind of early fall cold front where you have warmer-ish days, like 75 to 80 degrees during the day, but the nighttime lows are in the 50s. This is going to drop the water temperature significantly, and it's also going to produce some interesting conditions in terms of how the bass are going to react and how they're going to feed based on the weather. So for example, we had our cold front that's still kind of in the air right now. It's still going through. And what you'll find is that a cold front comes in different cycles. Now, I don't think a lot of guys really see these cycles of a cold front, but before the front, you have pre-front conditions. You have the rain, the clouds, thunderstorms, stuff like that. And that's going to come through. And right after that front rolls through, right after the clouds and the wind come through, you're going to have the next morning where you're usually going to have some cloud cover and you're going to have some wind. You're going to have wind that's maybe in the, 10 to 20 mile an hour range. And into the afternoon, the day after that storm, the day after the front comes through, it's going to be pretty strong winds. And whenever you have those stronger winds, the fish actually can bite pretty well because that water's going to be moving and it's going to keep those fish active. And I'll explain this in the graphic here in a second. But then as the front continues and you get to the second day after the front, this is usually when the wind starts to die down, you get bright bluebird skies, and you get really tough fishing conditions. What you'll find is the second day after a cold front are the toughest days to fish because there's no wind and there's just those bright bluebird skies. The reason that all this happens is obviously due to like barometric pressure and like weather and science and things like that I'm not really going to get into here, and I'm not necessarily an expert on all of that. But what I do want to show you is how the bass are going to be affected by this specifically. So I'll just kind of run through this, Randy, real quick with everyone, and then I will hopefully get your input on this as well. But basically, what I've found is that when you have these post-front conditions, these cold front conditions, what you'll find is that, again, before that cold front, it's going to be warm, you're going to have rain, you're going to have clouds, stuff like that. You're going to have basically a thunderstorm, some sort of storm that rolls through. And that's going to bring a lot of fish and bait fish up into shallow water. The bait fish are going to move up during those fronts to feed on algae and plankton around rocks or around brush piles, whatever that is. They're going to move up, and a lot of times I catch a lot of fish during those frontal conditions when there's a lot of wind and clouds, up shallow on areas with rock. And rock, hard cover, hard bottom are great places in those kind of during the front conditions. Then, as the front gets through, maybe it's the next morning or the day after, and the storm has passed, what you'll find is that there's still going to be a window the next morning where the wind is going to be blowing. And even though it might be sunny outside, the wind is blowing, and those fish will still be up on those rocks with the bait fish, feeding where they were during the front. I don't think a lot of guys realize this, but there's a great feeding window the morning of a cold front. It's going to be freezing, especially later in the year. You're going to have ice on your rod tips, potentially. You're going to be in gloves. It's going to be cold. But that morning after the front, when the wind is still blowing and the conditions are really rough, the bass are going to be chasing shad and bait fish up against shallow rock, things like that. One thing I will call out, though, is that you're not going to find as many fish in these post-front conditions sitting right up on the bank. In pre-front conditions, you're going to find a lot of bass that may be set up, for example, on shallow rock that's visible. You'll have these shallow riprap banks or whatever it is, where the wind's pushing up against there. You have cloud cover, you have wind. That's going to get those fish to set up against rocky banks that are visible to the naked eye. However, once you get into these post-front conditions, the bass are still going to be on that shallower rock, but I find that a lot of times they get a little bit more away from the bank. And what I mean by an away from the bank area, let me pull up a spot here. Here, for example, is a little rock point here that sticks out. And if we take the lake kind of back in time, you can see that sometimes this rocky ridge, this rocky area is completely covered up by water. And what you'll find is that there's going to be these areas that are offshore. You can see here's that rocky ridge. They're just a little bit, they're just a little bit off the bank, a little bit under the water, maybe still only in 3 or 4 feet of water, but they're kind of off the bank slightly. These are going to be your areas where a lot of those fish will get right after that post-front conditions, right after the front. They'll get right there 3, 4, 5 feet in that rock, especially in the fall. And they'll stay there until that wind stops blowing. It'll be blowing and blowing and blowing, and they'll be there. Then, after that wind stops blowing, what you'll find is that a lot of those fish are going to leave those shallower, rocky areas, maybe that have maybe it doesn't have to have rock, but it's harder bottom, maybe some clay, maybe some stumps that are up there shallow. And what'll happen is that those bait fish start to pull away from those rocks and start suspending out here more towards the middle of the deeper creeks, the deeper areas out here in the middle. And this is what happens kind of in the afternoon on the day after the front, and then especially the second day after the front. So 2 days after the storm goes through, that's when you're going to have a lot of your shad sitting out here in the middle. The reason for that is because there's going to be no wind and basically bluebird skies. You guys know those days, high pressure, no wind, bluebird skies. Those bass or the bait fish are going to be sitting out here suspended a lot of times. Now, there are ways you can actually target the bass that actually suspend and chase those shad, and I'll talk about some of that a little bit. But there's also going to be some bass that will stay up in these shallower areas around the rock and things like that, and just kind of be hanging out up there. They're not necessarily actively feeding, but they're just sitting up there. And you can catch those fish with slow-moving baits like a shaky head worm, maybe a drop shot, dragging it super slow. Or you can find fish that actually will pull away from those rocks to some deeper cover, some offshore areas, maybe like a brush pile that's in 15 feet of water. And those fish will set up with the bright bluebird skies around brush piles, things like that off the bank. So you'll have a group of fish that are kind of sitting up here, really shallow, still in those rocks, but inactive, not biting very well, or bass that have moved off the bank to deeper brush piles, also inactive. The key here is that they're both pretty inactive, and you have to use pretty finessey baits in those second day after front conditions with the shaky head, the football jig, to get those fish to bite. And that's really the cycle that you'll find. And then normally, as the week progresses, you get 3 or 4 days after the front, it kind of normalizes, and then the bass just kind of will continue to move depending on where the bait fish move, what the wind is doing, things like that. And that's more of your normal fishing. But that's, in a nutshell, how I've found these kind of cold front cycles to go. I'd like to get your opinion on that, Randy, because I know that's how I think about it, especially from an offshore perspective. But is there anything else to add there from a shallow water perspective?
Yeah, there's a ton to add on that. There are so many complexities to this. I don't even know where to begin on this. But first of all, I want to talk about Jonny laid out a real good foundation for your typical frontal scenario. But the thing that I found out about fronts, and specifically in the fall time of year, because fronts will affect bass behavior and movement in different seasons in different ways, but specifically in the fall here, is that not all fronts are equal, because every front is sort of unique to itself as far as how that front's made up and the intensity of it. So that has a lot to do with the post-frontal effect that it has, because you got some fronts, like Jonny was saying, where you got rain coming in, prior to the front, clouds, and then the next day, the front blows through, you got some wind, and you lose your clouds to some extent. Now, the thing that I found out about is once that front blows through, you've got a lot of different things can take place. Sometimes you have those fronts blow through and it just bluebirds off immediately. It's like you lose the wind turns around 20 miles an hour to the north. You don't have a cloud in the sky 3 hours after the front goes through. And then like today, we had a front go through last night, rain, front went through, and it's been cloudy all day long here and not much wind. So every single front is different on how it actually takes place. Now, what happens from a shallow water perspective, in my opinion, is that after a front goes through in the fall time of the year, if that water is anywhere between, say, the 60 to 75, 80 degree range, like it is right now, it's still 80-degree water temperature here in Missouri, is that the bass don't necessarily move very far at all. In fact, in shallow water, I'm talking about, water less than 10 feet deep, fairly close to the bank or in flats or whatever, those bass stay pretty much where they're at. What you have to do is you have to adapt, and you have to change your technique and presentation to match whatever post-frontal conditions you have. And Jonny made a good point as far as he's talking about after a front goes through, the bass will move out a little bit deeper. That happens also in the shallow water application. Let me give you guys a prime example. let's say a front's coming through, it's supposed to get in like at 6 o'clock in the evening, and it's sort of raining or it's cloudy and it's a little bit windy, low light conditions, and you're fishing a riprap bank that has 3 to 4 foot of visibility, and you're just smoking them like on a popar or a Zara spook right up against the bank before this front rolls through. Typical fall time scenario. Once that temperature drop, or once the front rolls through the next day, and you got your wind, you lose your clouds a little bit, those bass have not left that riprap, but they're not in that zone of that, 1 to 4 foot off the bank where you're catching them on that top water. They're still there, but they may have just pulled off just maybe 3 to 4 or 5 feet away from that, zone you're catching them on the top water. And you may have to make an adjustment and catch them on like a crankbait or a shaky head or something like that. That is it, sort of in a nutshell, of shallow water deals, which we'll get into later in the podcast here. In shallow water, it's all technique specific, because what happens is and this is a generalization, but it's pretty true, post frontal conditions, moving baits are really good. Power fishing is really good, that type of deal. Once the front goes through... You
mean prefrontal, Randy, right?
Prefrontal.
Prefrontal.
Prefrontal. Moving baits are good, bass are aggressive, that type of stuff. Once that front moves through, what happens is the bass, depending upon the wind and the sunlight conditions, they will either react to a fast-moving reaction bait, or they'll want something super slow. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit, but that is all dependent upon the light penetration, the sunlight intensity, and how much wind that you have after the front. Most people, the day after the front, they're really cussing the wind, and they're really, it's difficult fishing in a 25-mile-an-hour north wind, but that wind is your friend that first day after the front. It's just like Johnny said, the second day after that front, when you lose your wind, that's when everything really goes south after that. That's when you have to make some major adjustments that we'll talk about here in a little bit.
For sure. And the thing with the post front and the front, Randy's was spot on. It's not perfect. What I should have probably said it a little more carefully. What I gave you guys was a solid foundation of what usually happens, but there's so many different variations to every single front that you'll experience, and so don't take what I said as the gold standard that's always going to be that way. Part of it is just learning to adapt to how weather affects bass in general, because really at the end of the day, a front is just a very extreme weather change, but the bass are going to be affected by changes in wind, changes in sky conditions, whether it's sunny or cloudy. They're going to be affected all in the same way. The thing with cold fronts to make them challenging is that you normally have several factors changing quickly. You'll have a drop in water temperature. You'll have a change in wind velocity or wind direction. Plus, you're going to have a change in cloud cover to sun. So you're having many factors changing at once. All of those have an impact on the fish, but they have it to a varying degree. So if maybe there's a lot more wind than you expect, maybe the fish are going to do something different than if all the conditions were the same and there was less wind. And there's actually something that I'm working on that I'm going to be announcing here pretty soon, guys, that's going to help make a lot of that a lot easier for you guys. And if you guys are Patreon members over on my Patreon page, you're going to be hearing about that very soon. So just be on the lookout for that, because I have something really cool coming for Patreon members and then also for the public here at some point. But basically what I wanted to kind of talk about now, Randy, is just give these guys something a little more concrete in terms of these post-front conditions. And I wanted to give you guys some of my areas that I like to fish in the post-front conditions and why I'm fishing them. So let me pull up Google Earth again, and I'm just going to give you an idea. And Randy, maybe while I'm doing this too, if you could find a couple spots on Google Earth as well, just maybe some good post-front spots that you would fish up shallow. So really what I find is my go-to areas a lot of times when I'm fishing post-front or after a cold front are going to be areas where maybe initially the fish were pulled up and feeding pretty well up in shallower water. So we have a nice bank right here on Grand Lake, and there's some flooded bushes. Let me find a good image here. There's some flooded bushes, some flooded laydowns. I'm sure a lot of guys would come in here and potentially fish some of these laydowns, maybe catch some fish on a spinnerbait or flip some of these bushes, things like that, and get a few bites. But after that front is finished, the rain stops. You maybe have some wind still, but maybe it's not cloudy anymore. It's just sunny with some wind after the front. The places I'm going to are places just like what you see right here on the map. Here are those bushes, and I just took the lake down, guys, using Google Earth. I have a video explaining how to do this over on my channel. Just have been Fish the Moment Google Earth, and it'll show you how to take the lake down and stuff like that. But basically right here, you can see a really nice offshore rocky spot where I've caught them really well in post-front conditions on Grand Lake before. Same right here. These rocky outcroppings, these rocky spots, basically will hold a little bit of extra heat. And normally when you have those cold fronts in shallower water, you're going to have the temperatures of the water drop, the surface temperature drop a little bit. And that's going to cause the bass to get a little bit hesitant to be up there super, super shallow, but they still don't want to be out in like 30 foot of water if they're up in a foot of water the day before. So they'll pull just a little bit out onto some of these offshore rocky spots that if we take a look when the lake is at normal pool, you'd never know they were there. They're not deep, they're 2-3 foot of water, but those types of areas, you'll have groups of fish pull up. And I actually have some of my best days, Randy, the day after a front and actually the second day after a front. I love fishing in post-front conditions. It's actually my favorite time to fish because that's when a lot of fish will move offshore, and I love fishing offshore. In those days when it's the pre-front and the wind and the clouds are blowing, you can catch them offshore, but it's a lot easier to catch them up shallow, and I don't really like doing that as much. Another area that I like to fish is a little bit different, and I have this lake here that I can show you that is a lake that normally it's at a pretty good level, pretty normal pool, but one year it was drawn down like 11 feet. So this is what it looks like normally, but now here's what it looks like drawn down. You can see all the stuff in the water. Now I want to show you a couple of these areas that I fish in these post-front conditions. Again, pre-front, I might just be throwing a spinnerbait down the bank or doing whatever you do when you fish down the bank. I don't do that much. So you guys probably know better than me what to do when you're fishing shallow. But when you get those post-front conditions, especially when you get no wind and that wind slicks off, there's like nothing going on, just bluebird skies. This is the type of stuff I'm looking for a lot of times in the fall. As you guys know, in the fall, the bass are going to be moving further back into the creeks, into the pockets. When the lake's at normal pool, they might be up on the shoreline here, things like that. But as that cold front rolls through, air temperatures are going to drop, water temperatures will drop, and those bass will pull from the bank out here into an area like this, which is like an offshore brush pile. And I have caught some giants here in post-front conditions in the fall out of brush piles just like this. This one specifically and the ones just like it. You can kind of barely see it, but there's little twigs and sticks sticking up out of the water. And those bass will pull into these guts or the center of these creeks, setting up in these brush piles. And when you have no wind, no cloud cover, it's just slick calm, these brush piles that necessarily aren't that deep, maybe they're only in 6 to 8 foot of water in the middle of these pockets and cuts and stuff, are absolutely deadly. Other areas that can be really good in these post-front conditions are areas like this where you have a nice little culvert that's under the water that was formed by an old road. You have an old house foundation right here, more rocky outcroppings. Like this little area here is dynamite in the fall for me because you got a culvert, you have a rock pile, you have a house foundation, and all that stuff is completely under the water at normal pools. So you have your house foundation, you have that rocky spot, you have the culvert, and those fish will get up in these shallow bushes and stuff and trees. You can catch them on a spinnerbait pre-front, but after that front rolls through in the fall, they'll pull out of that flooded cover and get out to these offshore hard spots, kind of just areas where there's some cover and stuff for them to get around. The key really is those fish like to be around some sort of shade or cover. Some sort of like a big brush pile like this, around some stumps. They don't like just being out there randomly in the middle of nowhere off the bank. They want to be around some sort of hard bottom and some sort of shadowy cover, a brush pile, something that casts a shadow. The final area that I really like to fish in that post-front condition, especially on lakes that have grass. Let's say we're on Lake Gunnersville here in Alabama, or if you're further up north and you have grass in your lake, fishing grass mats and just offshore grass in general is a great way to catch fish in the post-front, not post-spawn. Post-front conditions after a cold front. And what you're looking for on areas like this where there's just grass all over the place here, you want to find your thickest clumps of grass, whether it's the thickest matted grass that you can find out here on the main river channel, or maybe if you're moving back into some of these flats and stuff back here, you want to find the thicker clumps of offshore grass. You can catch them on a chatterbait, you can catch them flipping, stuff like that. And I'm looking for those big clumps, thick clumps of grass. Those bass in the post front conditions will just go straight to those really thick cover areas where the big, thickest clumps are, and you can absolutely hammer them on those grass lakes. So those are just some ideas, guys, of areas that I fish in the post front, after cold front, stuff like that. Hopefully that gives you a better idea of kind of what you might look for on your lake. Any thoughts there, Randy?
Yeah, I'll sort of go over. I'll give you guys two different scenarios here for the post front deal. First of all, I want to cover. I need to share my screen here, Johnny. And see.
Yeah.
I got my Google pulled up, but I'm trying to get it where I can share it here. Which one of those icons do I need to hit up there at the top to do that?
To do the
share on the Google map?
Oh, make sure you go to the screen, or go to our where our faces are, and then you got to hit present screen. I think it's a box with an arrow pointing up.
Okay.
So you say share screen or present now.
Present now.
There you go.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, Randy, really quick. Oh, there we go. Got it. Good deal.
There we go.
While you're doing that, I'm gonna do one thing real quick. I just want to.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm gonna cut you off just for a second here, Randy. So stick around, because this is the best time to do these ad breaks. Because now they're like, oh man, I got to see Randy's juice. Old tricks of the trade here. Anyways, one thing I want to do real quick, guys, is let you know about our Bridgeford beef jerky giveaway. Basically, every week on the Fisherman live stream, we do a giveaway for a case of Bridgeford beef jerky. Huge shout out to Bridgeford. And basically what I want you guys to do this week is leave a comment down below letting us know what your favorite fall bass fishing lake is. I just want to know what lakes you guys are fishing in general. I know that there's a lot of lakes around the country, but what are your favorite lakes to fish in the fall? I know some guys avoid certain types of lakes. They avoid certain areas. Maybe you just fish the same lake all the time, but let me know what your favorite fall bass fishing lake is, or if you don't fall bass fish at all. That's kind of interesting. If you just put that down in the comments of this video on the live stream, you'll be entered to win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky. So just let us know that. Huge shout out to Bridgeford for continuing to support the podcast, and also want to let you guys know really quick, or just want to give a huge shout out to our other sponsor, the Bass Tank over in Tulsa, Oklahoma. These guys are experts at installing fish finders, and they have done a great job with my boat. I just got done having them reconfigure my entire boat, and if you guys have any installation needs for new fish finders, or if you've had your electronics poorly installed in the past, definitely check out the Bass Tank. They are the only company I trust to touch my boat or put anything on my boat, because I know they're going to do the right thing every single time. And if you don't have your fish finders wired properly, guys, you're not going to get the best image, and you're basically going to waste your investment. If they're not set up properly, they're just not going to work. Sometimes they might have not enough power going to them. Maybe the transducer isn't set up properly. Maybe there's a cut or a nick in your transducer cable that they did while they were installing it and they never noticed. There's a lot of things that can happen, guys. I've seen it all in terms of fish finders. So definitely check out the Bass Tank if you need any bass installation needs. One other thing really quick to call out that is super cool. Randy, this is just a personal thing for me. If you guys head over to Tackle Warehouse, head to tacklewarehouse.com, then go to down here, you can see new items, or you can just go right here, new items in the middle of the page, and go to new craws and creatures. Right here you'll see the Jewel Baits Versacrawl. I actually designed this bait in conjunction or collaboration with Jewel Bait Company, so officially I have my first fishing lure that I've designed on Tackle Warehouse, which is like a childhood dream come true. Pretty crazy. If you guys haven't seen this, it is the Versacrawl, which is a jig trailer that I designed to be the one and only jig trailer you're ever going to need. And basically, if you take a look here, you can see it has this double-legged design so that you can actually come in here and you can cut the inside legs out and have more of like a grub style bait, and then you can cut the outside legs off and you can have more of like your finesse cross style bait, or you can leave it all together, which is what I do a lot of times to give a really nice full profile. It's an awesome little trailer, kept it simple with 3 colors, black and blue, green pumpkin, and then bass whacker, which is awesome in that clear water. And it's awesome just to have have a bait that's on there that I've designed, and a lot of guys have been asking how they can get this bait. They've been waiting to check it out. So if you do any jig fishing, definitely check it out. I would recommend getting the junior size. It is the perfect for pretty much any size jig. The peewee size is really small if you want to use like a Ned rig bait or something like that, but the junior size is what I use. And we're also going to be coming out with a senior size. Got derailed by all the COVID stuff from this past year, but we're going to try to get that bigger size out here too at some point. But for now, we got these 2 sizes. Now I've been hammering them on this junior Versacrawl on the back of my jigs, football jigs, finesse jigs, everything all year round. So definitely check those out over on Tackle Warehouse. And if you are going to check those out, I really appreciate if you head over to our website, fishthemoment.com, go to the Support Fish the Moment tab, and use our Tackle Warehouse link. Just click that link right there, and if you click that link, it'll take you straight to Tackle Warehouse, and then when you check out, we get a small percentage of the profits, so you can double support. You can purchase a bait that I've designed and give us a small percentage of the profits just by using that link for Tackle Warehouse. So that is it. Sorry to kind of go long on that, but just that was something that was I wanted to share because I thought it was pretty cool, if anything. Good deal.
Okay.
So let's jump into it, Randy, and just let us know where you would be fishing in the post-front conditions.
Okay, can you see the screen there, John?
Yep, I got you.
Okay, I'm going to give you guys 2 scenarios that have really worked for me good in the post-front conditions. The first one, I'm going to throw you guys some grass scenarios. Now, I've got Lake Kissimmee in Florida pulled up here, but this would also apply to any of the TVA lakes, Chickamauga, Kentucky Lake, California Delta, all the grass lakes in Texas, natural lakes up north that got grass too. It's just a good overall thing. Most of the time, when you have a front that comes through, say a bad front comes through in this area and you've got a north wind coming down this direction. This is north up here, so you got a north wind. The first thing you're going to have to do on a natural body lake with grass is you've got to get out of that wind to some extent. So I always look for these areas that are sort of protected from the north wind, say this bay right here. And then on most grass lakes in the fall, you've got grass that's matted in the surface. That's sort of the time of the year that it's mature. So for example, here, if you got a good mat right here, grass mat here, most of the time in front of that mat, you're going to have some submergent vegetation that's a little bit more scattered. Almost every situation you'll have that. There's 2 ways that I like to fish during the post-frontal situation on a grass lake. The first thing is I get out here in the open water and I fish super fast reaction baits, like a lipless crankbait, maybe fish a jerkbait real hard, something to trigger a reaction strike. That's the way that you can catch them out here, especially if you got your wind. If you don't have the wind, or it's like the second day of a front, that's when I'll move up and I'll start punching and flipping the matted vegetation that's adjacent to the submergent vegetation. And most grass lakes, you'll notice that after that front comes through, that's how all the tournaments get won. They either get one punching matted vegetation, or they get one on a reaction bait out off the bank in that same type of an area there. How the front affects this type of water here is, say, for example, you were catching them out here before the front rolled in, like throwing the top water on the edge of the grass, or casting the Cinco out in the grass or something like that, or a wacky rig. Those are the type of baits that get killed after the front. Any type of a slow falling bait, like a wacky rig or a Texas rig worm or a Cinco, or like a spinner bait, slow rolled spinner bait. Those are the baits that the bass really get off of after that front rolls through. You've got to think in terms of, generating reaction strikes, either in the open areas or in the tight cover. That's why punching those big 1 ounce weights that gets that real fast reaction strike in the thick cover is so effective after a front. And that's why ripping those rattle traps and jerk baits over the submergent vegetation also works good in grass lakes. Okay, the next one I want to take you to is a man-made lake, and sort of show you how I approach that. I'll take you guys to Stockton Lake in Missouri. And Stockton Lake is a good it's a good cross section that if you guys fish Eastern Kentucky, Tennessee lakes like Douglas, Cumberland, Cherokee, you can also adapt this to those particular areas. But here's how the scenario usually goes most of the time in a post front situation on a man-made lake. Say, for example, the front was getting ready to come in. You got your pre-front conditions. You got the wind. You got the clouds building. It's a little bit warm. It's usually have a southerly breeze, that type of stuff. That puts the fish in the fall time of the year on these man-made impoundments shallow and aggressive. And the first thing that I like to do in the fall time of the year is I'm really looking hard at all these secondary points in the coves and creeks like this. I don't really care if they're rounded or sharp, but I'm running these secondary points and backs in these coves like this, usually with a top water or some type of a shallow running crankbait like that. But I'm concentrating specifically on the secondary points, and you can catch a lot of fish doing that. Now, once that front comes through, all these fish that were setting up in that 5 foot of water on the point ends and the sides of here that were really aggressive and smashing walking top waters and crankbaits and really aggressive up shallow, after that front comes through, this stuff is done right here. I mean, you're basically wasting your time after that front rolls through in there, especially if you lose your cloud and your wind. What I do in a man-made situation or a man-made lake after that comes through, say, for example, if I was fishing a tournament, first day of the tournament, I caught a big bag on these points here. Second day of the tournament, a massive front rolls through. I lose my clouds, got north wind. I won't even go back here. The next thing I do is I'm scouting the upper extremities of a lake. Every lake usually has 3 to 4, major extremities to them. So what I'm looking for is I run as far up the river that I can get, way, way up in the river. And I start fishing, basically the shallow cover that's super, super shallow as far as up as I can get in these creek arms. And I like to get back into even to the areas where the old channel starts to come into the lake here, because normally you've got a combination of the water's a little bit dirtier in this type of an area. And also, like right here, you can see, you've got some scattered lay down wood with stained water. And what happens is after that front comes through, if you go to these shallow areas that have a combination of shallow cover and off-colored water, like these laydowns right here, those bass will hang out and get real tight to any shallow cover that's available. It could be laydowns, it could be docks, it could be rocky banks, overhanging trees, stumps, whatever. But what happens is, since you have dirtier water and you have shallower water where these fish don't have the option to move up and down as much, you can catch these bass here. And a lot of times you just have to make them bite. This is a situation where I may take and, throw a crankbait down the side of these trees 10 times, and I'll flip a jig 5 or 6 times in it. And more than not, that pays off for me after those bad fronts. So that's my game plan, guys. In natural lakes with grass, I'm either fishing reaction baits off the banks, emergent vegetation, punching those heavy weights. And then in the man-made impoundments, I look for the dirty, stained water and get in there with that shallow cover, because those are the fish that they're least affected by a post front than anywhere else on the lake.
That's a good deal, Randy. That's really good stuff, and completely opposite of what I do. So it's really cool to get both perspectives, as always, just because I would never be back in the back of those creeks, and I know you probably wouldn't be fishing out there on that offshore brush and stuff like that in the fall. So it's cool to get both perspectives for sure. So one question we have here from Ryan that was pretty good is: are you always are you always fishing around cover no matter the conditions? Ryan, not always. So sometimes you can find fish just on like flat mud banks and stuff like that randomly, but most of the time bass are related to some type of cover. I would say 80% of the time they're around some type of rock, shell, grass, laydown, something like that. The only time you're going to catch them when they're just like on nothing, like just a flat mud bank with no other cover around, is if those bass are actually migrating or chasing shad. They're basically not related to anything other than bait fish themselves. And that's sometimes you can find that happening if they're like roaming on bluegill beds or if they're chasing shad. But at that point, they're related to shad. They're not related to anything else. So I guess what I'll say is if the bass are related to shad, then no, they're not related to cover. If they're not related to shad, then yes, they're related to cover. Does that make sense to you, Randy?
Yeah, it is. That's and again, a lot of that it depends on the combination of the water clarity, the bank angles, type of lake you're fishing. Every lake is unique to that situation there. But I'm curious to know, one of the questions I'll ask here, because I'll get into it here, from an offshore perspective, do you see any difference in your bait selection, post front, pre front?
Yes,
specifically, what are you using for that?
Yeah, I actually had that pulled up here, Randy. I wanted to get into that about the baits, and so that was a perfect segue. I didn't even let you know I was going to be doing that. So let me pull up just a couple baits that I throw a lot in these different conditions. Give me half a second. Okay, here we go. So here's a bait that I throw a ton in the fall. Pre-front conditions. I catch some fish in the post-front conditions on this bait as well, but it's my go-to pre-front condition bait when those fish are on a lot of offshore rock piles, things like that. I'll throw a lot of lipless crankbaits, grind the bill on that lipless crankbait, ripping it up and down. I also throw squirrel crankbaits, but I'm throwing some sort of moving bait. That's kind of the idea offshore. There are times when I'll throw a little bit deeper diving crankbait depending on how deep they are, but a lot of the fish I catch in the fall are going to be on shallow flats around some sort of rock or shell or something like that, and I will burn a lipless crankbait, specifically like a chrome black back striking red-eye shad. And I'll find that if I can get that thing around grass, rock, not the best around wood, but if you can find those shad up there on those shallower flats offshore, it's absolutely deadly, and it will work pretty much around the country. Now, if it's getting a little bit, let me just pull up Strike King here. If the fish get a little bit deeper, I may be going to like a Strike King Series 5XD or a Series 5 crankbait, or even down to like a Strike King 6XD crankbait. But I'm usually going a lot of times in the fall when those fish are in that pre-front mode, I'm throwing a crankbait a ton. It's my number one go-to bait, and I'll have like 6 different crankbaits on the deck of the boat at different depths depending on where those fish are. As soon as those fish get in that post-frontal mood, though, where the front move through, the wind is dying down, and it gets really calm. I'll even throw these crankbaits, by the way, when the wind is blowing right after the front. So like the morning after the front, if the wind is still blowing still, I'll still throw the crankbaits. But as soon as that wind dies and it gets slick, calm, no wind, there are 2 baits I throw, and pretty much only 2 baits. The first is a swim bait. I catch more fish in the fall. We're both coughing. Sorry, guys. More fish in the fall in those post-front conditions on a swim bait than any other bait. And I basically throw 2 swim baits. I throw Megabass Spark Shad in the 3-inch size or the 4-inch size. I haven't had as much success in the fall with the 5-inch size in that swim bait, though there are times when there's really big gizzard shad that I get a few bites on it. But usually it's that 3 and 4-inch size swim bait. Now I'm throwing it on like a little Finesse swim bait head like this, and I'll throw it in sometimes down to like a 3/8 or a ½ ounce, but a real small swim bait head with a ball head, jig head. And I throw that thing out there and we'll just count it down and fish it super slow. And a lot of those bass I'm targeting are the suspended bass. And I used to do this well before I had live scope. I've been doing this for 7, 8, 9 years in the fall, catching them on swim baits. But it was crazy last year, Randy. I know you're going to hate to hear this, but every single day in the fall I went last year in post front, I was catching 30 to 60 bass a day on a swim bait with the live scope. Those fish get in such a classic position in the sense that what will happen is that those bass will pull off of these shallow areas and suspend on bait fish out in front of a lot of rock piles and things like that. And they'll just be sitting here suspended, and they are just easy pickings. Oh, sorry, I haven't switched over. You have these bass that are suspended on these bait fish. They were up here on these shallow rocks, and they've moved off the rocks to follow those bait fish. And they'll just be suspended over 10 to 15, 20 feet of water, maybe out in front of the rocks, maybe over a brush pile or something like that, and I am just reeling that thing in and hammering them. And on Table Rock and on Beaver Lake and a bunch of all these deep, clear lakes, I was catching 30 to 60 fish a day on a swim bait like it was nothing in those post-front fall conditions. These fish don't get targeted that much, and they were just easy pickings. The other bait I throw, especially if those fish, actually let me go back over here, especially if those fish are positioned more towards the brush piles, maybe they're a little bit deeper rock, that's when I go to my tried and true football jig. And honestly, in the post-front conditions in the fall, the only two baits I throw are a swim bait and a football jig. Unless I'm on grass lakes. If I'm on a grass lake, I might throw a chatter bait as well through some of that grass. But if I'm fishing on a lake that doesn't have grass, I'm throwing a football jig around the thicker cover, around the rocks, around the brush. This is just the Fisherman offshore jig that I designed for Jewel Bait Company. Comes through brush super well. And I'm throwing the swim bait for those suspended bass. And one thing I'll always keep telling you guys is football jigs are best during football season. So September through February, that's the time to throw a football jig. I throw football jig year round. It's my number one confidence bait, my favorite bait. But the best time to throw a football jig, if you want to get the most bites and the biggest bites in a football jig, September through February is the time. If you don't throw football jigs, you haven't experimented with them, pick up this jig. It's on jewelbait.com, Fish the Moment offshore jig. It's only available here. It's got a double cable weed guard, great head design, 5/8 ounce, and you can fish it in 3 foot of water or you can fish it in 30 feet of water. I've caught fish in all depth ranges on this thing. It's absolutely awesome. I have a whole video here explaining how it was designed, and takes a lot of knowledge from a lot of great jig fishermen, not just from me, to put this together. So that is my deal, Randy. Those are the baits I throw. What are your thoughts there?
Well, first of all, I got 4 primary baits that I've really figured out that work good after the front roll suit, but I want to talk just briefly here about what not to throw. Guys, I can tell you from lots of experience, learning the hard way, costing me lots of money learning the hard way. If you have a front go through, if you've got any type of soft plastic jerk bait like a fluke or a floating worm or a topwater, take them out of your boat. Don't even keep them in your boat, because you will get burned doing it. I can't tell you guys how many times I've just been smoking them on like a fluke or a floating worm or topwater the day before a front. So much so that the day the front comes through, I keep throwing it. And what you're going to do, you might get some followers, but you're going to basically be frustrated. So get rid of those type of baits. Bass do not like to come up on baits, especially slower moving baits, after a front comes through, especially in shallow water. Now, the 4 baits that I've found out that have worked really good here, Johnny can pull them up on Tackle Warehouse,
Yep.
is one of my favorites is a 1/4 ounce rattle trap, just old school 1/4 ounce rattle trap. If you've got wind after a front comes through, whether it be on a flat, secondary point, any type of stuff like that, around docks, any cover like that, I've caught them around boat docks, good on it. A 1/4 ounce rattle trap, specifically, I like the gold side, black back gold side. That's a killer in the fall time of the year, and you'll get bites on it, and you'll catch good fish on it that won't hit a 1/2 ounce or anything bigger like that. 1/4 ounce rattle trap is deadly in the fall time of the year after a front comes through. Second bait I like, which is sort of similar to that, is that Megabass Flap Slap. I don't talk about the Flap Slap much because it's sort of like a secret deal for me. I clued Edwin Evers on it years ago before he knew about it, and he about won the Classic twice on it. But it is a killer fall bait. It's a shad type bait. It's got a super tight wobble. It's sort of the same characteristic, or it sort of has the same strike triggering mechanism as the 1/4 ounce rattle trap. It's a flat sided bait. It's got a tight wobble. It's a silent bait too. Another thing that you'll find out about post frontal conditions is they either like a super loud bait or the silent bait, one of the two. So a lot of times if you have wind, they like the louder bait, like the rattle trap. But if you lose your wind, that's when baits like the Flap Slap are super productive, because it's a quiet, subtle bait that still will trigger post frontal strikes. The third bait I like is a jerkbait, and I like the Megabass 110 Silent model. And this is another post front deal that makes a big difference. If you go to the traditional 110 that has the rattle chamber in it and the moving balancers, that has quite a bit of noise. And after a front comes through, specifically more in the mid to late fall, when those bass start to get on a jerkbait and that water temperature starts to get down in that 60-degree range, you will have a hard time catching fish on a rattle and jerkbait after the fronts come through if you lose your wind. And going to that 110 silent model, that's a silent jerkbait. There's something about it that the fish it generates strikes after those fronts come through like a noisy one won't. And not many people throw the thing. I mean, a lot of people, like specifically with Megabass, they're so, they cost quite a bit of money. A lot of people just get the 110, they get a few colors of it, and they don't try the 110 silent. But guys, I'm telling you right now, I throw the 110 silent more than any other jerkbait out there, especially after the fronts come through and you lose your wind. And if you've got water visibility of 4 to 6 feet and you lose your wind after a front comes through, that silent model will catch a lot of fish. And the last bait, there's other ones, but the fourth one that I use a lot is some type of a heavy cover finesse jig. Like I think Jill makes that heavy cover finesse jig, a small profile, fairly heavy jig, something that's like a 9/16 ounce. That's got not the wire hook in it, but a little bit stiffer hook. And then just using a small trailer on it, like Johnny's, junior Versacrawl, something like that. And pitching it, flipping it around whatever shallow bank cover that you have. And one thing that I've noticed is after a front comes through in the fall time of the year, that's the first time that they really get on a jig good. And a jig will compete, especially a finesse jig, it will compete with a creature bait or a trick worm or a shaky head even better. There's something about the compact size of the finesse jig and the small trailer that really works good after a front. And I like to throw it on bluff banks, channel swings, around docks, laydowns, anything like that. And one of the things that I do with the finesse jig is I'll trim that skirt back really short, and I'll also trim my trailer back really short. So it's just a little bitty, just a tidbit bite-sized little finesse jig. But the key on that, guys, is you want to use the heavy size. There's something about going to that heavier size in that finesse that will get that reaction strike. So those are the 4 baits that I found that have been my top producers after that front comes in.
It's a good deal right there, Randy. And it's interesting because obviously we have a similar kind of setup in terms of the baits that we're using. You're kind of going a little bit shallower with the jerk baits, flat side crankbait, stuff like that. I kind of use my swim baits as a jerk bait, but obviously a lot of the fish I'm targeting with the swim baits are in 15 to 40 feet of water, which is sometimes a little bit too deep. But if those fish are higher up in the water column, I will throw a jerk bait as well, like a Megabass Vision 110 +1 or +2. By the way, Andrew, on the stream here, Jess was asking about the lure retrievers. I have a fishing money pole that works as like a pole to get those jerk baits out of trees and stuff. And then the Hound Dog is I'll pull it up here. It's from Jewel. It's a little thing. These things have been around forever. Everyone knows. Everyone who's in the know knows about these things. I've been using these things for years. But it's just this little like lure retriever thing. You just put it on like a marker buoy and you just drop it down, or you can put it on a fishing reel if you don't want to wind it up. But I just take a marker buoy, tie it here, drop that thing. You can hook it on your line, drop it down, and it pulls those baits out really well. Sometimes if it's really wedged in there, I'll pull out the pole because you can kind of get a little more leverage with the pole. But yeah, if you're hooking a Megabass jerkbait on, you need to have something like this, a lure retriever or something. It's $9. So get one of these. It will save you hundreds and thousands of dollars of lures over the course of your lifetime.
That's the one I use right there that you got pulled up. I've had that thing for 20 years, and that is the best setup I've found. I've got it on just some real thick trot line.
Yeah.
And it gets them off better than anything.
For sure. And then Andrew says, for $25, I'm putting on my swimsuit. Funny story about that. My buddy Jimmy, he went swimming for a Megabass jerkbait in Lake Washita one year. And we were fishing in March which means the water temperatures were 50 degrees. It was a warmish day, 60 degrees outside. But he hooked his Megabass Vision 110 on a tree. He couldn't get it out. He went swimming in 50-degree water to go get that bait back. That was, when you're a struggling college kid, $25 Megabass. He was getting it back. Put it that way. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I've got some buddies that live in California and Northern California, Clear Lake, and it gets pretty cold up there. And they all go swimming. If they lose one of those high dollar, custom built, $150 swim baits, it doesn't matter if the water is 40 degrees, they're going in after it.
For sure. A couple comments here. One was from Ron. He says he's hoping for some more on the water live videos soon. Definitely gonna be doing more of those, guys. Still a little bit like got a cough and stuff going on, so trying to stay off the lake just for a bit longer to make sure I'm good to go. And so we were gonna do it today, but I decided that we'll probably just hold off, and I'm gonna try to do one in the next couple weeks here. Get out on the lake and do a on the water live stream. Finding fish. I'm thinking about going over to Beaver. That's probably pretty risky because Beaver is not an easy lake to find fish on. I might actually find some fish before that one. Go out for a few hours beforehand to make sure I have some fish found and maybe show you guys how to fish a suspended swim bait. I saw a bunch of questions here on the stream. I can show you guys how I count down my swim bait with and without live scope, and that could be a fun video. Normally, once you get that first cold front of the year, those bass really get going on those offshore rock piles and stuff like that. So maybe I can find some fish on the swim bait. Maybe I won't, and I'll just show you guys what I do without fishing or without catching fish. So either way, it'll be fun. If you haven't seen my last On the Water live, it's on this channel. I went out for 2 hours, found some fish live on the lake I hadn't been to in like 6 months, and caught them. So that was pretty cool. Anyways, so let's see here. There's a bunch of other comments and stuff here, and I know we probably should try to get through all of them. But anything else, Randy, you had on the cold front bass fishing while I kind of scroll through these comments?
Yeah, here, when you're talking about here again, specifically the fall time transition period, fronts, that type of stuff. The one thing that I found out about it is as September gets into October and October gets into November, the types of fronts that you have change a little bit. And as that water temperature cools down, the bass also will react differently, because I found in my own fishing that in the fall time of the year that September and like up till the mid part of October, maybe towards the end of October, until that water temperature starts to get below 60 degrees, that's when you really have these fish have major personality changes in the mood and their personality and how they bite certain baits or won't bite certain baits. But the thing that I found out about is once that water temperature gets below 60 degrees, and specifically as it gets closer down to that mid 50s range, which is normally a lot of times in November or around different parts of the country, those fronts don't have the same effect as they do earlier in the fall time of the year, because for whatever reason, anyway, in this part of the country here in Missouri, is when the fronts that we get like in November tend to be, the clouds hang on for a long time. You may have a front come through and it may be overcast for 4 or 5 days once that front comes through, and even on into December. And in that situation there, excuse me, I don't see the bass reacting the same. I see the fishing being really good after a front. I mean, I've caught some big bags of fish like up at Lake of the Ozarks, Table Rock in November and December, like fishing big spinner baits right up on the bank after a front comes through, if you still have your clouds. So I guess one of the big things, if you guys can take away anything from this live stream tonight, is not all fronts are created equal. Every front's different. The bass will react different to different fronts at certain times of the fall time of the year. And that's something that's just a matter of experience. And most of it has to do with a combination of water clarity and water temperature about how much it affects the bass. I see that bass, the clearer the water is, the more the bass are affected by, a bad front coming through. And the dirtier, the shallower the water is, a lot of times they're less affected by it. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But, a lot of times you can't overanalyze it. It just is what it is in fishing. And that's sort of what I found about it.
For sure. And what I find in those post fronts is a great comment there in that whole thing. And what I always try to do is I try to fish as shallow as possible after a front. and then move deeper as needed. If I still like to try to fish offshore, but if I can catch them off the bank in 2 to 4 foot of water, those fish are much easier to catch than those fish that are suspended out in 20 or 30 foot of water, just because they are easier to find, easier to kind of manage. Now, when you find them, if they're out there suspended, you can hammer them, but it takes like 3 or 4 hours of graphing sometimes to find those fish. So definitely don't limit yourself. The big thing though is when you have no wind, no clouds, that's when it gets tough, and that's when you maybe need to be slowing down, going a little bit more finesse-y, moving off the bank, whatever it is. But if there's still clouds and there's still wind, those fish are still biting up their shallow for sure.
It took me a long time to learn how to fish post front, because I mean I learned the hard way. Back 30 years ago, we just didn't have this information. I mean, people didn't have an understanding of fish movement and fish personality like we do right now, and it's, man, when you have to learn the hard way, when you go out and you try something all day long that doesn't work, and then you do terrible in the tournament as a result of that. I mean, it stays with you, and you work hard to try to learn the difference. I can remember I'll tell you guys one tournament here. I fished at Sam Rayburn. It was a fall tournament at Sam Rayburn. This was it was one of those BASS specialty tournaments. I can't even remember exactly which one it was, but anyway, the day before the tournament, I got onto just this floating worm bite that was, you just can't believe how many big ones that they were the water was up a little bit, and I was throwing this floating worm around some flooded bushes up there. Water temperature was about 60 degrees. And I just had giants coming out right and left, and getting this thing all day long. I couldn't even sleep at night the night before the tournament. Sure enough, we get a north front comes through overnight. We get a north wind, winds blowing 25 miles an hour out of the north the next day. I go out there and throw the floating worm all day long and catch one on it. And they were there, but their mood has completely changed. It's like that cold front completely changed their entire personality. Everybody that wound up catching them flipping instead of like me. And this was back when I was 25 years old. I just didn't know any better. And that one tournament stands out with me more than anything else about how cold fronts affect bass in the fall.
That's awesome. That's a great story. A couple of things real quick here. David, sorry, I don't have a link for the Bass Tank. No link there, but you can just head over to their website. It's all good. Another comment here was about from Steve about when they draw the lakes down. Some of those lakes in California, I know, and other places, they draw them down like 20 to 30 feet, and then you also get a cold front like a week later. The cold front is the least of your worries in those situations. After a lake gets drawn down 25 feet that fast, the shad are going to be on the move, the bass are going to be on the move, and there's so many other factors changing with the water quality, all these different things that my biggest recommendation is find the bait fish. Wherever the bait fish are, that's where you're going to find your bass, whether they're deep or shallow or wherever they are back in the creeks. Just find your bait fish. That's the key on those type of scenarios. If they're out there offshore, go fish offshore. If they're up there shallow, go fish shallow. That's my biggest tip there. Last but not least, Randy, everyone says you owe us one live scope rant. And I didn't want to bring this up because I didn't want to, get you all upset before bed. But I'm gonna throw this one thing at you. I heard while I was over at the Bass Tank, and I've heard, I'm not gonna say who, but there are guys out there who are sometimes thinking about putting not one, not two, but 3 live scopes on their trolling motor. They need 3 of them on there because they have some reasons, and I don't really understand the whole concept behind it. I just heard that some people are starting to put 3 live scopes on their trolling motor. What are your thoughts on that? Not one, but 3 live scopes on the trolling motor.
I think that is the most messed up thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, at that point, Johnny, they might as well just take a stick of dynamite out in the boat with them and just toss it in the water when they get to their fishing spot, because it's sort of the same thing with that. But I mean, now at that point, I think that even the guys that love technology, I think that most people would draw the line at that and say, that's just getting overboard. We just don't need that. It's just like that's just way too much, man.
That's where I feel like you lose any sort of relatability to the average angler once you get that far into it.
If that is true, I want to see a picture of that setup, and I'm going to do a YouTube video on my channel and have a blowout on it. So I'll definitely plan on doing that.
Oh man, that's crazy. We were actually trying to figure out how to do it with my trolling motor, just because we wanted to compare the Humminbird Mega Live with the active target and the live scope all at once. We couldn't even figure out how to do it. And I'm fortunate that the different companies are sending me these products so I can test them and do things like that. But we're thinking about we're going to have to like attach them on a separate pole. And also, I'm never going to run 3 while I'm actually fishing. It's just for testing. I feel like that's way overkill. Like 1 is fine for me. I don't need anything more than that. I know some guys run 2, but I'm never going to go that extreme. I think that that's ridiculous. And the average angler should not be expected to have to do that. But I don't know how they even do it logistically unless they have like an extra long trolling motor. I mean, I have an 18-foot Triton, so if I put that extra long trolling motor, I would hit oncoming traffic with my trolling motor head if I had any larger of a trolling motor. So I don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're running 24-foot bass boats now to accommodate the trolling motor size or something, and they're going to need, like 12 lithium-ion batteries in the back or something like that to run all those transducers. But, man, that's pretty rough.
That's sort of like somebody putting like 300 horsepower engines on the back of their bass boat or something. That's sort of akin to that a little bit.
For sure. And we could go back and forth. Everyone's going on now about how live scope takes skill, and you can't. We've all gone over this, guys. Right? You can watch Randy's videos for that. If you guys do want something a video that is interesting, and I'll just throw this out there if you guys want. There's a video I made. Just go to the main Fish the Moment channel and just look up Fish the Moment live scope. Is live scope worth the money or whatever it is? And I did this video. Let me try to pull it up here while we're talking. And basically, the whole idea is I wanted to use data and math, and like I actually pulled statistics from Bassmaster or from Major League Fishing tournament events, and I did a bunch of crazy stuff to figure all this out. Let me pull this up over here. So this is the video. If you guys are interested, it's right here. It's watch this before wasting thousands on fish finders. Let me click over here. This is the video right here. Watch this before wasting thousands on fish finders. It's this bar graph video here. It's from 5 months ago. I break down why live imaging is actually not that helpful for the average angler, but it's very helpful for the very skilled angler. And I use math to explain it and the learning curve on it and all that stuff. I know, Randy, you watched it, and you said you had to watch it like 3 times and didn't fully grasp it. I threw a bunch of algebra equations and things in there. I got pretty technical, but it will, if you guys are kind of fishing nerds and also numbers nerds, data nerds, definitely check out this video. It will give you a really good perspective on what is realistic in terms of your expectations with these types of sonar. Right here is the deal, that video. So check that video out. I spent like 35 hours making that video, just sitting at my desk. So hopefully you guys will check that out. It got like 50,000 views, so it's still good views, but I spent a lot of time on that video. So definitely check that one out. Good deal. Okay, Randy, well, that was our weekly dose of live scope therapy. Next time we might talk a little bit about like installation process, and then one day we'll get you out on the boat with the live scope again. But I think the last time you went out with the live scope with me was like last September, and I think you're still cooling off from that one. But it's been a year, so maybe it's time. The trauma is past. Maybe we get back out there again and we show you how live scope works.
Yeah, we'll take it down to Table Rock and get out there in the middle of the lake with everybody else this November.
Good deal. Well, guys, really appreciate everyone on the stream. We got 250 people on, which is awesome. And I really appreciate all the support. You won't see as many videos coming over to Fish the Moment, guys. Recently, apologize. Got a bunch of other projects I'm working on that you're going to be very excited about, I guarantee. So I just have a lot of things rolling right now, so producing the YouTube videos has kind of fallen to the back burner just a tiny bit. Plus, I was sick all last week, so that didn't help. But next week, I have a great video coming out. We're actually double up on a 3 and a 4 pounder on one deep diving crankbait on Grand Lake and during Catch 15 challenge, which is pretty sweet. And I'll also have a lot more really cool videos coming out as well. So stay tuned on the main Fish Moment channel. Stay tuned here on Fish Moment Live. We're here every single week. And I might actually be next week on the lake live on Beaver Lake, hopefully. And we'll be out there trying to catch some fish live on the lake, and so join me for that too if you want to catch that. So anyways, Randy, thanks for tuning in with me today, and hope everyone enjoyed the stream.